Hey everyone, this is the SIG Auth meeting for April 1st, 2020, and I forgot to share my screen, so let me do that. All right, can you guys see that now? Awesome, thank you. All right, let's get started. Mike, Tim? Together. Mike, are you there?
Sorry. Oh, am I the first item?
You are the first item, because Tim's not on the call because he's in a different meeting. And this is
Did anybody? We're deprecating RBAC. All right.
I'm assuming this is about removing the V1 beta one, not actually saying we want to deprecate RBAC.
No, this is a very bad April Fool's joke.
As a counter proposal, let's ditch it and re-implement it in OPA Gatekeeper.
Yeah, nice.
Yes, basically Tim and Mike are terrible people.
Next.
All right, Jack, I pushed you up in the agenda because I basically push everyone but myself up. So.
Okay, no problem. Hey everyone. So yeah, I mean, this might be short. I just wanted to call attention to the PR for supporting intermediate certificates in the certificates API, because I would really like to get this solved for the kubelet kind of certificate rotation stuff in the next release. It seems like there's been some conversation about like, should we be supporting multiple signers, which I think maybe is a little bit orthogonal, but like maybe we should be talking about that as well. And then also there's some discussion about like how to handle the flags and what's a good user experience here. So it just feels to me like if we could get more eyes on it and more opinions and more thoughts, that would be really valuable, because there's not been a huge amount of consensus so far.
So, I mean, we do have, I know David's on the call, Mike's on the call. I don't know if James is on the call. But, I think David and Mike, you guys have commented some on this. Is there any discussion you want to have with some high bandwidth? Is there some concerns? I personally haven't had the chance to really think about it and look at it.
Yeah. I was just going to comment on kubelet certs is the only thing that feels weird to me with intermediates. But I think that's a documentation issue and not a problem with intermediates in general.
Can you elaborate on that? Because we're using intermediates for kubelet signing.
Do you have a single root for multiple clusters?
So we only have one production cluster. We have a root CA, which lives in Vault, and we didn't want to put the root CA on disk on the masters. So we put an intermediate there, and then that's what we sign with. And then as a result, currently the kubelets only present, well, they don't present the intermediate, and therefore the API server has to trust the intermediate as well, which is annoying. So what we want to do is get the kubelet to present the intermediate, which means we need to provide it back to the caller, basically.
Yeah, so that sounds like a fine usage of intermediates. Where I would want to think about the security model a little bit is if we had a single root for multiple clusters and what that means for node identities.
Okay.
Because that means if any kubelet in any cluster could become a node in another cluster.
Okay, and do you think that currently there'll be a use case that people are using whereby they have separate intermediates for separate clusters and they only trust the intermediate?
Is that possible?
Well, it's definitely possible, but I guess are we saying that that's something we want to support?
No, I think intermediates are in general very useful. And I think that's something that we want to support. That's why I said this is not a problem with intermediates and it's a documentation issue. I think that we just need to record gotchas with respect to node credentials. And because this does make it very easy for somebody to say, hey, I want a single root across all my Kubernetes deployments and not fully understand that we don't isolate node identities to individual clusters.
Cool.
Beyond
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
roots.
My concerns were different. My concerns were about how we actually managed to express this. The proposal was specifically about adding the signing certificate to the status of the CSR, but intermediate can encompass more than just the immediate signer being used. And I would not want a solution that restricted based on that. I don't think that would be reasonable support for intermediates in a way that people would expect. I don't know enough to know whether it's considered normal to throw a bunch of certs in a file for signing and you use a key to try to find which cert you want to use. I don't know whether that's a normal way to express it. It's not how I would expect to express it.
Do you need to use the key, or can you just use the lowest depth cert?
Well, you can have a cert signed. You can sign a single cert by multiple people, right? It becomes different certs when you look at them. You can include them all. Isn't that how cross-signing works? Right?
Yeah, I agree with that, but I still feel like it's a graph that you can follow down to the lowest node, and that there would be no reason to provide a node lower than the one you're signing with. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so that's why I specifically called out, I don't know enough to know whether it's normal to do this. I don't know. It's not how I would.
But the point I'm making is that you don't necessarily need to use the key to match up the cert. You can instead walk the graph of certs. I mean, it's still not something that I would ideally want to be doing.
I guess that falls into the I don't know if that's normal. It sounds weird. I don't know if it's normal, and I'm not aware. So I need someone. I would appreciate someone with more background, whether that's someone like James or Mike or someone who knows. I would want to look at the expression of this and make sure that it makes sense when you're providing more intermediates than just your immediate, than the signer that you're immediately signing with. The other thing that stuck out to me is that we do support multiple signers today. And I would want to have some chance at a consistent story for how we would flag this with respect to new signing cert key pairs, which I do see as something reasonable to include in our CSR signer, right? So this is possible to express. I would expect the switch case where we have 4 switch cases and they all choose the same thing today. I would anticipate building it out so that they could select different things. And then does that mean you end up with 4 different flags, or the same flag repeated 4 times, or some sort of flag key value?
David, if I could, I want to make sure I understand the problem / use case. Are you trying to make it so that you can have different private keys per signer name for the built-in signers using the built-in controller?
Yeah, it's actually already stubbed in for doing that today. And I think it makes sense, especially when you consider the constraints placed and the natural progression of something like a legacy unknown, right? As we try to de-emphasize the idea of legacy unknown, you can imagine people trying to push them to shorter and shorter expiries, different chains of trust, maybe even having at a certain point it isn't honored as a client certificate, so that people get a series of pokes instead of one catastrophic, oh my God, legacy unknown just suddenly broke. You can also see there's an immediate, there are potential reasons to have kubelet client, kubelet serving, and general client certificates with different signers so that you can have revocation, since we don't support native revocation.
Right. So I had brought this exact point up when James was doing the signer name implementation. I wish Jordan and James were on this call, but like the general feeling I got from them was they didn't disagree with it, but they didn't necessarily want to put it in either.
Some of that becomes motivation for who is actually willing to do the work. And I understand that aspect of it. What I don't want to have come out of this is something that we would be unhappy extending to multiple key pairs. It's not about blocking key pairs or blocking the ability to have intermediates. It's just, would we be happy if we made a natural expansion of this? Thought experiment, not actual implementation.
Yeah, so Matt, in reference to your comment, we did think, and like a few people have proposed, having a separate parameter for a file that contains all the intermediates to append on top of like the signed certificate. I guess the confusion or the kind of weirdness that may be averse to that comes from the fact that the normal case is probably that you just want to provide the signing certificate as like the additional thing to be returned. And therefore you would have to, in the normal case, put that in both files. It's not really quite a CA chain, which is normally what you provide like as a client. But as a signer, it's like you're providing the signer and maybe the signer's intermediate certs leading up to the root as well. But we would end up with the same certificate in two files, potentially two files with completely different content. And that feels a bit weird to manage and maintain, especially with respect to file rotation. And that was basically my hesitation.
Yeah. Another kind of weird case to consider is in the CA chain that you end up giving to the client may actually include multiple paths to multiple different routes. So it may not be just a linear chain. You may have an intermediate, which is cross-signed by two routes. You want to give the client both parallel chains so that it can validate either way.
I agree with that. I don't really like the idea of any kind of inference to detect which cert is the one that we go with the key. I mean, unless we did something really simple, like it's the last cert in the file or something. But it still feels like magic. But yeah, I just want to flag that an implementation that involves having two files is a bit weird to the user as well, because they have to take this cert and then to enable this feature, they've got to put it in two files, which just feels a bit unintuitive to me that you're putting the same cert in two places. So I feel like we haven't reached like the beautiful solution here that hopefully exists.
So you can, so if you have the cert, you can see if that cert signs itself, in which case it's a root, right? In that case, you don't need a chain. Otherwise, you could default to, if it's not signed by itself, always include it as a chain.
Well, that was actually something that I proposed early on, was why don't we just always return back to the sender, the signer, if the signer is not a root. But again, there was concerns about it being magic behavior. I think Liga in particular had some concerns about that. So
it also doesn't provide the intermediates that you may actually need, right? You still end up having to have a parameter to say, these are the intermediates.
Indeed, unless we expand the signing certificate file to have some concept of certificates, which I think is doable with some heuristic, like it's the last cert in the file as the signer. Maybe that is the best way of doing this. And then that way we can have arbitrary number of certificates in that file. There can be as much cross-signing as you like, and we still only have one file. And you can have multiple signers with multiple files.
Right. My question on the PR was, I don't know if that's normal. It sounds weird to me, but I don't know if it's normal.
Does anyone have any experience with a similar use case to this?
So I do know some folks in the search better than myself. So if we can express that, I don't know if in the issue we've expressed that particular concern. If we can do that, I can at least find them and be like, please tell me if this makes any sense. Actually, I don't necessarily mind.
I can do that. So I will add to the PR description like a full description of where the confusion is coming from, and like the specific UI thing that we're trying to present, and then we'll see if we can find some people to comment on that, that would be really useful. Cool. I think that's all.
Cool. Okay. Does anyone have anything to bring up? Because the next few items are basically completely sort of interrelated. They're all sort of around one particular topic. So if anyone had anything, we can talk about it. I think Jim was on the agenda, but he said he couldn't attend. So I think he'll present some stuff to us next time. All right, cool. So all the stuff sort of that I have on there is basically related to the external credentials plugins for kubectl. I guess the overarching theme would be, getting that API to GA, and then sort of all the pieces that come with that. So Mike, you and probably Greg are probably the best points of contacts for understanding what it would take to get GCP into a state where it would be using a credential plugin and not the built-in one, and sort of like what problems you guys foresee you and your customers having migrating. I had reached out to the folks that maintain the Azure stuff, and they have implemented an exec plugin, and people are already using it. Woo, it's great. The sort of context I have behind this is like, especially for like the Azure one, they've had some pretty subtle bugs and regressions of things we fixed in the past being reintroduced accidentally, as well as like the desire to backport what is effectively a feature to an old version to try to handle what is a bug, basically. So I don't really think that the Azure folks are benefiting in any way by having this in tree. And I see Rita's on the dock. I don't know if Rita's on the call. Yeah, she is. But my desire there would be to, just as we have decoupled things over time to sort of help push this along, and let them sort of move at their own cadence. Certainly would have the benefit to us at a code level of no longer depending on the Azure SDK. But I think we have seen, like, for example, there was this PR, I'll open up. This was a backport to, what was this? To 117. And then, Jordan was like, backport features. There was disagreement that this is a bug, not a feature. All that set aside, in that time, they were able to write the Azure exec plugin, and people were just able to use that and kind of move on. They don't need to get a fixed version of the 117 kubectl or whatever. And that's kind of the hope I have in general about this, is if as this stuff moves out of tree, we stop being sort of in the critical path of them fixing things, and also hopefully they can build stronger automation around testing this stuff, because like the last PR I reviewed for this, it looked fine, but I had no idea if it would actually work. And that's probably not a great place to be for something built into code. Folks got comments?
I don't have concerns from the GKA perspective, and it seems like from the Kubernetes perspective, this is aligned with the long-term goal for moving cloud providers out of tree. Yeah, I think before we switch, we should make sure that the API is GA, and that we have reasonable coverage. And this doesn't affect the GCP cloud provider, but we should make sure that we have reasonable coverage for interactive logins, because I've seen a number of issues related to interactive login and the exec plugin, and we don't do that for the plugins that we use, but actually I'm not sure if the Azure one does. Yeah, we should just double check interactive login. We got like reports that
having something like 1,000 pop-ups on Mac OS or something. But we should maybe write tests and get some implementations to exercise that.
So if I remember correctly, in the beta version of the API, we took away, we don't tell the plugin anymore if it's in interactive mode at all, right? Like it has to figure it out on its own.
I think we forward a TTY when it's in interactive mode.
Right.
I need to dig it up. We have like a single lock per authenticator, but multiple components could potentially create multiple clients on startup, and that doesn't work with our single pop-up requirement.
Right.
It just needs a little bit of leg work, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general feeling I got was there was some relatively minor issues, and I think if we added like sufficient testing around them, we could probably catch the things that we missed and then make sure they don't regress. And I think in a similar vein, I think the OIDC plugin probably needs a little bit of love, like that weird cache thing it's got going on that is hard to reason about.
It is in our interest to fix this, the SIG Auth plugin.
Say again?
It is in our best interest to fix it and make it work, and I agree that it can be improved with a little bit of love if somebody is motivated to work on it.
So I wanted to ask, in regards to the path to GA, there is a requirement for remote TLS handshakes. Are we like actually considering that as a requirement? You can open the cap up.
That sounds like a separate cap.
Yeah, it's like beta to GA, support this.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I can make a PR to this and update it and be like, no. To me, this sounded like the discussion we had around PKCS 11 just a little while back, right? Like the ability to support some transport level stuff that could let you do some magic. So, okay. So I mean, in terms of like a timeline, like what do you guys feel like for deprecation? Like I don't necessarily feel like we have to wait till this is GA to start deprecating things. Like for example, we deprecated and removed OpenStack, right? Like, so I don't necessarily think that matters. And also, like, I think this is significantly already better than what's in Tree.
I think we should have a GA replacement before we start. What is the deprecation for GA?
Say that again?
2 years.
Deprecation. Oh, for like removal of something that is GA? Is that what you mean?
Yes. 6 months, 2 releases.
I thought it was at least 3 releases.
I think we should have a GA replacement before we begin deprecation of in-tree plugins.
Okay. That's not unfair, I suppose. Open issues. Yes, there was a question asked. Yes, I mean, we do have some open issues for the exec plugin. I don't know if this is all of them.
A couple of things off the top of my head that I seem to remember the exec plugin lacking compared to our gross, terrible, shouldn't be in tree GCP plugin, but like we're here. So running it without gcloud, I mean, that's just on us, Google, on figuring out a way to ship a like lighter weight thing that can sit alongside and can be used with a exec plugin, as opposed to leaning on the fact that we got our client libraries in there early. But that is a way that people use the GCP Auth plugin today, is to run client Go with and just throw a kube config at it that lets it do the token exchange dance on GCE or whatever. And then the other one, do we actually persist the credentials locally without shelling out? Or is it just in memory for the exec plugin? I think it's just in memory, right?
It's just in memory. It's up to the plugin to do any kind of caching, basically.
Yeah. This is also just a GCP specific thing, but our G Cloud is this massive Python program, and it takes about 500 milliseconds to start it. So like if you do kube control get pods, and every single one of those calls has a 500 millisecond cost before it's even doing like something over the network.
It in memory though, so it only does it on startup in a single process. And
guess what? Kube control get pods is a new startup every time.
You're saying if you have some sort of like bash pipeline where you're like get pods and then making 500 kube control invocations.
The user experience of like, oh, let me see what my pods are. Okay, let me see what my pods in this namespace are. The 500, the half a second plus whatever my network cost is, was such a terrible user experience when we were mocking this up, like very early on. Also, that's our own fault. Like we have this huge binary that we're relying on to do this tiny little credential exchange dance, but it's just the things that we would have to figure out before we can just migrate over.
So is it that the built-in GCP one caches? And
Yes.
Even though it's, to be clear for anyone on the call, the built-in GCP integration literally just shells out to G-Cloud anyway, basically. It's just that it writes to the kube config. So
right.
it's basically ready to be an external plugin. It just apparently needs caching.
Yeah, well, I question if caching in the kube config was the right choice to begin with. It seems wrong looking back. It was
it's very wrong. Like half the point of these things is like you stop putting secrets in kube configs.
Yes.
Maybe a slightly different question to ask CJ would be if AWS had a similar problem where it was just slow. Would you be supportive of them entering as an authentication plugin in Tree?
Right, I completely agree. And it's like path dependency. We are where we are. We need to get this out of Tree. I was just raising a couple of the things that are like, people do depend on this today. We have work to do. It would be nice if we had a GA thing and we could like plan our work around it before we rip it out. I mean, we can always, carry this.
The deprecation timeline is long. As I recall, it's a year, right? This is directly user facing. I thought I remembered it being a year. If we wouldn't be sensitive to other people saying, well, I have a similar problem and I want to come in, given a year-long time frame to come out seems fairly reasonable.
Yeah, that's probably fine. It's just a question of, do we, is that a year after there is a GA alternative, or is it just—
I think that's the real question, right? Like when does it start? I think we agreed that it's a year from deprecation, that it goes poof, but when does the time start? And like I know, like Mike, you seem to be leaning towards it's after GA, and I personally lean towards it's today, just to make it happen at some point.
I can see a defense that says you must have exec at GA before you deprecate something else. But if exec went to GA in 119, it seems pretty reasonable to deprecate the in-tree ones also on 119, because there is a GA alternative right there.
Yep, agree with that. I think it's a similar situation with PSP where we have been putting off deprecation because we don't have like an alternative, and or we don't have, you know what I mean. But if we think that exec should be the path forward for this, we should put in the work to get it to GA and get it to GA quality.
So from the general conversation, I don't think we have concerns. So I know I have a little thing on there for feedback from users, and I had asked Matt to provide it since he used it a lot. But in general, is there an API level concern for the exec plugin that we want to address before GA? Because I think we can fix all the bugs and polish it, but if we disagree on the actual semantics, then I don't think it really matters.
I think I have one piece of feedback that it would be an API change. It would be a backwards compatible API change, though. Sorry, are we ready to jump to my?
Go for it, man.
Yeah, Zomo asked me to join. I've at this point implemented a couple of these exec plugins. The couple of issues I wanted to bring up. One was caching. We ended up implementing caching ourselves using like a platform-specific keyring library. It's the 99 Designs keyring to store kind of refresh tokens, or what's like a refresh token, and that's okay. I don't think it doesn't seem like we would want to add a dependency on something like that into client Go. So that almost points to me that this is something that should just be done by the plugin. The other feedback is something that we've had to do in both of the plugins I've worked on is have some sort of audience value that's associated with the cluster. And when you configure this thing, the current way that you configure that is you need to put that audience value as a parameter to the exec plugin. So it's like a, an environment variable or a command line flag to the plugin. And that just breaks the format of the kubeconfig a little bit, where you've got clusters and you've got users. Now you've got information about the cluster, which you have to store in the user entry. I wonder if, to get around that, we could extend the API to when the plugin is invoked, provide some information about which cluster the operation is being performed on. The only other way you get around this is by like inferring the path to the kubeconfig and parsing it and trying to figure out like the active context. And I'm not sure it's even possible. The information that we pass could probably look like the cluster struct from the kubeconfig, passed into the exec.
Yeah, I think I had related thoughts to this. I've been looking at this a lot recently, or effectively, if your plugin did something that was in any way dependent on the cluster, like its host name, its TA bundle, it has to somehow be explicitly told that. Sort of like it's not a bad thing, like if you have like a program generate the kubeconfig, because then it can just kind of glue all the information together and it's like a for loop. It's not a big deal. But it's pretty painful if you have to put it together yourself, because it's the same information being repeated sort of arbitrarily. Maybe that's sort of okay. And
yeah, it's not such a big deal if you have like one kubeconfig per cluster, and you just manage them that way anyway. But if you have a kubeconfig that, let's say, has 100 clusters in it, then it's also going to have 100 user sections in it, and it just breaks kind of the usability of the kube control context functionality.
Mo, have you signed up for getting this going?
It's funny, Jordan asked me the same thing. Yeah, so yeah, I can certainly take the point on, like I can go update the KEP and start making sure we agree on what we think is the GA requirements, other than the obvious fix the bugs. And then, yeah, we can move forward there. But so are we saying that in terms of deprecation, basically we wait till the release that we have GA ready, and then we deprecate? Is that how folks sort of feel? And that starts like the 1-year timeline before we start deleting things?
That makes sense to me.
Okay.
And just to clarify, you mean GA then plus 3 releases, right?
GA plus a year.
A year, okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
So Rita, you have time, but you guys already have a plugin that probably works better than the built-in one, at least.
Sure. Just good to know when the cutoff date is.
Yeah, Rita and I talked, and I was, thinking super aggressive timelines, and I think I scared them. But that was, my desire is super aggressive, but it's okay if you go slower. This is a related question, and I don't know if it makes sense or not. But I was poking around trying to find like implementations to see like what people did and if I saw any hacks or anything. Do we like want some kind of registry of like, here's some exec plugins? Like, does that help anyone? Like in docs? Like, I was thinking along like how we wanted to document like different sort of replacement technologies for PSP, like SCC and OPA and all those things. Like, does it make sense to document this, or is this like a, if you need it, you'll find it whenever your provider tells you to go download it?
No, it would be really good if there was a documentation entry with like blessed build, like suggested solution. Sorry.
We're planning to have something like that on once I get around to publishing those profiles for pod security. We wanted to link through to tools that support those profiles. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, like if we, like certainly if, like the OpenStack one makes sense. It's sort of within like Kubernetes SIGs. It's basically the official way to interact with OpenStack and with Kubernetes. So that one makes a lot of sense because it's sort of like very official. And like, I think, Micah, you're on the call, I believe AWS has their own sort of like, this is our blessed version of how you interact with AWS clusters using our exec plugin. So certainly those are pretty big names and kind of important. I can also see like the Azure folks, since, you know, they've traditionally been in tree, but they would want to put theirs somewhere in the documentation so folks know, like, you know, if they weren't present and they came back to Azure and they're like, hey, where did the Azure plugin go? I used to configure this inside kubeconfig. How do I do it now? It might help to have it in the docs. Like, here's the new Azure plugin. Something like that. Basically, what I'm mostly asking is, do people feel like we're overstepping like what SIG Auth should be sort of doing by giving a list of like, there's some exact things.
Well, you're definitely stepping in it. I mean, you saw the doc people who came up to SIG Arch and were like, can we delete the references for cloud provider specific information?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very valid point, right? Like maybe it's not SIG Auth's place to say that these are better than some other ones or anything like that.
That's not
even my
opinion one or the other. Just pointing out that, like, just last week or week before, they came and brought it up.
I would recommend a GitHub search query in a kept comment that finds all known exec plugins. Since these are for like specific environments or like specific setups, they're probably best discovered when you are deploying Kubernetes to a setup that uses an exec plugin. I'm not sure if there's much value in like having a Uber doc and it invites a lot of like continuous stream of PRs for people who want pointers to their GitHub projects or whatever.
Well, it could be maybe done with collaboration with CNCF Security SIG, because as far as I remember, they gather some useful information for, you know, all cloud native projects, and authenticating to Kubernetes API server is one of them. What would be?
Yeah, I guess
I would just stop short of blessing them. I don't know how useful the giant giant list of Kubernetes managed offerings is to users in the Kubernetes IO doc. But since, yeah, I don't know, they're generally probably not portable exec plugins. So you're kind of looking for a specific one. I I think it would be useful to have a list when we decide what the GA requirements are, or if we want to change anything.
Okay. Cool.
But I'm kind of worried to sign up for maintaining a list.
Yeah, no, I'm not actually worried about the maintenance. I'm more worried about the gatekeeper role.
Yeah.
So if you could find a clever way to somehow punt this to crew, you could make it Phil Whitrock's problem, and he's not in this meeting.
That's a really good idea.
Excellent. Making enemies and SIGs that I'm not part of.
In fairness, it is for cube control. Well, in many ways, it's for cube control. It's probably how you find it the first time. It wouldn't be the worst spot for it, but I would be careful.
Okay, let's see. We still have some time. I guess we can. I don't think we have done this looking over our issues in a while, so we should probably do that. Let's see, which one is this? What is this first query? This is the unprioritized, unassigned, who not need information. Okay. Let's see, Jordan and I talked about this yesterday. Mike, since I have you on the call, in regards to audit annotations being sort of like propagated from authentication and early layers, did you have any further concerns? I basically made it so that it didn't matter where in the stack you called that function from. It would either directly go to the audit event or to the list that was going to get sucked into the audit event. So you can't like incorrectly use it.
Unless you use it in the outbound filter chain.
It works in outbound too, because if I understand what you mean by outbound, by like outbound, you mean like rest storage?
So there's the inbound path of filters, there's registry, and then there's the outbound path of filters. Since audit is the last in the inbound path, it is first in the outbound path. So,
but it does a defer in there to get the stuff that's later.
That is that outbound portion of the audit filter, which is the first outbound filter that runs.
So give me an example of something that you could set an annotation on today that would get missed.
A defer in the authentication filter.
So that would run, yeah, I guess that would run afterwards. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I just wanted to understand what we are signed up to support annotations on.
Yeah, I mean, like if we really want to support that case, we could just put in that super early layer a defer, right? The one that attaches the ability to have early annotations, it could have a defer in there that.
It would need to write the audit event to the audit sync.
Yes, it would. Yeah, so it would have similar logic to with audit to actually push it right out. I don't know if you actually want that.
Maybe Tim should review this. I think it doesn't matter, in my personal opinion, especially for this initial use case, and that we should just like figure out what the behavior is for the first pass at this. And if we have a desire to set annotations in the outbound path filters, we can make bigger changes.
Okay, that's fair. I think that's fair. The other question I had is, so the way like token review is structured today, it passes in like a new context. So that context won't have like an audit event or any audit functionality. So that token, you have a question?
No.
Sure. That that invocation of the authentication stack won't set any annotations because it just won't have a place to put them. But we could have it set some if we wanted it to. And I don't know, like, if we want to try to worry about that, right? Like, to me, it makes sense to, like, you know, if you had like a node that's doing a token review, like there's some auditing of the fact that it was a node that did it and there's some like credential that I use or whatever. And then the credential that came out of token review, there's also like authentication, right? And
I think I'm not sure. I would expect audit events to be generated on the, with respect to the requester. And in that situation, it would be kubelet, not based on some path that gets hit in the subject access review or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I guess what it means is then, like, if you wanted to understand, like, from an audit perspective, who authenticated to the kubelet would have to somehow let you know.
Yeah. We've discussed like tighter, some coupling between subject access review and audit before, but have dismissed it. Where kubelet audit logs of a kubelet handler would be added to it, like collected centrally by Kube API server based on subject access reviews.
Doesn't it work that way today?
It records the subject access review. So you get it in the audit log.
But it's not explicit. You're saying like you don't have an explicit audit event like for the access to the kubelet. It's sort of this indirect piece. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you go back to token review, you know that the kubelet tried to do a token review, but you don't know who the kubelet then said was authenticated. For example.
Yeah. Have we ever talked about bundling, having a request that's like a token review and subject access review bundled together?
Who would be the caller?
So like if I make a request to the kubelet, it first needs to do a token review to find out who I am, and then it needs to follow up with a subject access review to see if I'm authorized to do the action. It seems like we could have a single request that says, first authenticate this user and then see if they're allowed to do this thing.
So don't we want those like independently cached?
You could return the response status could have them separated out in such a way that you could cache them independently.
Yeah, I guess there's no requirement that it has to be one blob. I guess like if we had such an API, to me it almost no, never mind. Ignore that. I was thinking something else.
I guess the advantages are it would make the audit trail a little simpler, and it would also cut the number of requests in half, which is especially important as we look to deprecate the read-only port on the kubelet. We expect a lot more requests to be needing to hit those APIs.
But does it really cut it in half if you have sufficient caching on the kubelet?
I mean, if you're caching the, I guess if you have different deadlines on the cache for the token and the subject and the authorization piece, then it wouldn't. But if they have the same deadline, then it could be the same. But I guess probably the authorization cache would need to be a lot shorter than the authentication cache.
But, if it's only one request, then it just becomes the authorization cache, right? And
yeah,
so you have like a single cache still that looks a lot like we use the similar strategy for the authorization cache, and there's no like authentication specific caching in the client. But yeah, we're super sidetracked. Let's document where this works and where it doesn't, and then what happens when it doesn't. In general, I think it's fine that you can only annotate on inbound and inside the registry. And I think that for these audit events or these audit annotations, the first write of the annotation should win. If multiple writes accidentally happen to make it with a single key.
Yeah, so I made one of the changes I did make was I made it a slice, so that way the order was preserved of how you put in keys. So that way, when it does actually insert to the audit event, it's not going to like somehow give you random constructs for the same inputs. So that part's there. Okay, Tim, if you do have time, if you could review that from an audit perspective.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. So there was this kubectl bug with SPN, which is really special. And they were recommended. Please go use the new plugin instead. Not have a bug. But I think I don't know if this was a regression from something that was previously fixed and then got re-added on accident.
Yeah, it was a regression.
So I guess hold on. I think I'm supposed to be attaching labels to these. What am I supposed to be attaching? This is unprioritized and unassigned. Okay. So this is probably like important soon, I guess. So as a general question to folks on the call, for like stuff like Azure AD that we have bugs with, how much effort do we put in fixing them instead of telling people to use the plugin?
So this is a regression, so it should be pretty urgent.
All right. Who's speaking, by the way? I'm just kind of curious.
But this is Wino.
Oh, yeah. So do we have a fix for it? Do you know it broke?
Yeah, I already have a PR out.
Okay. Is this one that could be reasonably backported, or are we going to have contention again?
We backported.
Okay, I'm just curious. There's a contention. Jordan approved it. Okay. Cool. Okay. Okay, this is tiny. That's good. Good. Awesome. Thank you for that. So we'll make this also important soon. So I don't think we can add, well, I guess we could probably add a label, but we can't just go crazy with the common name on metrics, right? Because it'll just explode the cardinality. Yeah, Jordan already said that. Do we feel like this would be a good sort of case for having audit annotations from the certificate authenticator? Like, I mean, I can imagine a lot of things like the SHA of the signer, things of that nature. Basically metadata about the cert. I don't know how much we would want to include, but we do have to be cognizant that even at the metadata level, the annotations are logged, so we don't want to go crazy.
Yeah, I agree that audit would be a better place for this. Also, Alex made a bunch of changes. I think they slipped to 119 to add monitoring of authentication or authenticators in general.
Right.
I'd like to plumb through a bunch of that work to audit as well.
In that particular case, are you wanting both metrics and auditing, or are you thinking some of it should only be in auditing? Or?
I think that what we're recording in metrics should be recorded in audit right now. Well, specifically, there's which authenticator like allowed the request, and then if we wanted to add like additional information per authenticator, like what's being requested here, that would make sense as well.
Okay.
So will these events even make it to the audit sync if you get a 401 because of an expired certificate?
It depends on how the authenticator is implemented. It can choose to annotate even on failure if it wants.
But then it returns.
I guess I see what you mean. If it returns early, the audit stack doesn't run. You're right. So I guess on the failure case, you might not. Well, no, you get a failed authentication audit too. Yeah, that's still there. That's still passed into.
Yeah, but we wouldn't record we wouldn't necessarily record from all the failed authenticators. We would just say this didn't authenticate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's probably a strong case for not necessarily having authenticators log on failure, because then you would get, even on success, you might get a bunch of like failed ones and then the one success, which would be extremely confusing.
Yeah.
I gotta drop. We're
Right.
out of time.
All right, it's been a good meeting, guys. Thank you for attending. Yeah.
See you.
Here. See you guys in 2 weeks. Yeah.